thanks to the whole team, Agustin, Raquel, and everybody who works with CETF. Really appreciate the partnership. We've developed a strong partnership over the years. I also have some of the folks who worked at Families in Schools or who work at Families in Schools here with us. Sylvia, Rebecca, do you want to raise your hand? Lisette and Gretel have also helped us a lot. So I just missed the team. So I'll be honest with you. I've been away from Families in Schools for a month and a half. So I'm barely new as the new COO of United Way. And so many of you may relate. I don't know, how many of you have experienced a job change in the last year or 2 years? Raise your hand. Or maybe a position, you had a major position change. So maybe you'll relate with me, but it's a very interesting, there's a lot of mixed emotions that you go through when you go through that process, right? On the one hand, I miss my colleagues. We spent 10 years working together on issues of family engagement. Working in a nonprofit, just like working in schools, is very hard work, very passionate work, and team is everything. The people you work with is everything in what you do. At the same time, you're excited about all the new challenges, all the what you're learning, everything that you're learning, and what has been very interesting for me has been how much it has given me time to reflect about the 10 years that I've done at Families in Schools. It's unbelievable how sometimes the fog starts to move and you look back at your 10 years and things seem to be a little more clear than they were like when you were just 2 months ago, right? So what I want to share with you today is not going to be like an academic presentation around family engagement. It's really going to be my observations about what I think I learned over 10 years around this field of family engagement, and kind of share that as a reflection to you. And I haven't prepped this. It's not like I was working on a big presentation. This is really, I'm going to test it with you. So hopefully, you can tell me if you like it or you may not like it, but I really want to share with you some of those observations. But I want to start by being able to share with you a little bit of my personal history on how it connects to family engagement, because just like those folks who work in schools and districts, the people who work in nonprofits, there's always a why. There's always a little reason why you choose to do the work that you do, and you invest, those sleepless nights, that effort, your family, your friendships. There's always a reason why, and I'm going to be able to. I'll share with you my why. I came to United States in 1986 from Guatemala, and I landed right in downtown LA in 1986. And I don't know if you remember what downtown looked like in 1986. It's nothing like what you would see right now with LA Live, Staples Center. It was a place where you wouldn't want to be after 5:30 p.m. at night, right? But my parents had arrived here from Guatemala, and they felt like they had reached the American dream. Just the fact that we made it through everything that we did, all the trip that we took through Mexico, all the times that we tried to cross the border and we had to be sent back, and just the pure fact of being and setting foot in the United States was a win, right? Slowly, though, I think after maybe a year, my parents were starting to think, wait a minute, is this why we made this big transition? There was a rampant, maybe it was drug abuse around our home, gang violence, the poverty. And my parents had started to ask questions. They didn't know, my mom is a housekeeper, my dad paints cars. So they were using the language that they knew how to use to start asking questions. And guess what was the first institution or network of people that they engaged to try to ask questions about my well-being and the well-being of my siblings? The school. I came in 5th grade, and the teacher, Ms. Mora, one of the only Cuban-American teachers in the school in 10th Street Elementary, who spoke Spanish, developed a relationship with my mom. And Ms. Mora says, your son is advanced in math. He's really ahead, but his obvious language skills, he can't speak, any English right now. He came in March of the school year. He should do 5th grade all over again. So my parents, said, yeah, we agreed. So I repeated 5th grade. Then by the time 5th grade comes back at the end, my mom comes and asks Ms. Mora questions. She says, how can I help my son become a profesional? And for those of you who speak a little bit of Spanish, you know that profesional has a very strong meaning associated with it. From my mom's perspective, profesional meant someone who didn't work with their hands, like her, who's cleaning toilets, who's cleaning tubs. Profesional meant someone who would have a suit, be able to be sitting at a desk, and would have to be working in a different way. So that was her image of what she wanted for myself. And Ms. Mora was a very, very kind-hearted but very straightforward person, and started to share with my mom all the pros and cons about maybe the options that I had. I was at 10th Street Elementary. She shared that I would have to go into Berendo Middle School, and then I would end up at Belmont High School. And in that part in 1986, Belmont was probably one of the most overcrowded, with one of the highest dropout rates that you can find. And Ms. Mora said, you may want to consider another option. You may want to consider your local Catholic school. And I always tell this story not because of this tension or because these dilemmas of public, private. Taking all of that aside, I tell this story because Ms. Mora was an advocate for me and my family. And in an environment that sometimes we believe that so much is focused, like we were talking about testing, about the instruction, many times what families need is an advocate who could be working on behalf of those families, being able to give them the right information. And at the end of the day, we could have chosen whichever way, we wanted to do, whether to stay or not. Thanks to Ms. Mora, I was able to have my parents involved, engaged. My parents never bought a home, never bought a new car. They spent all their money that they had in a Catholic education. I ended up going to UCLA, graduated from UCLA, first one in my family to do so. Went to Georgetown, got my master's from the School of Foreign Service, first of my family to be able to get a graduate degree. And living in Washington, D.C. And I do this work when I came to families in schools because I recognize that partnership between the family and the teachers and the school is so critical, can change lives immediately. Not even 3 generations from now. We're talking about in a period of 40 years, my parents went from not having a job in Guatemala, where we were living, we were not, I would say, the poorest, but we were in very poor conditions, to now having their son being the new CEO of United Way of Greater LA. Isn't that amazing? So I tell you that because that's how I come from my personal story about family engagement, right? So I jumped to be the new CEO of Family Engagement 10 years ago. And, I was coming from education, but I didn't quite understand the whole intricacies. I was never a teacher, I never was a principal, I never was an administrator, but I knew I needed to learn a lot about it. So as I have now reflected, and I now have a month and a half, things are starting to become a little more clear about the work that I was doing. And I almost feel like what the field of family engagement is very nascent, it's very new. We know how important it is, but we haven't really yet made it the central point of our work. And it's almost like if we're watching family engagement in a black and white TV in the 1950s, and yet everything else has moved up to HD TVs, right? We're still seeing it from a very basic perspective, and what I've been thinking about and the reflection that I want to share with you, and again, this is nothing prepared, I was thinking about it this morning, is I see it, there's 3 dimensions of family engagement that as I'm reflecting back about my 10 years, that became clearer and clearer to me. So I'll share those to you and see, what you think. Dimension number 1. When I came into family engagement and I shared with someone I'm working in family engagement, the first thing they thought was 0 to 5. The first thing that came to mind was the family and parent engagement was about parenting, being able to tell parents how they should be helping their kids behave better. Because you know what? Some of those families really don't know how to really, be able to teach their kids good manners. So we should just help them, give them some information about what's really good behavior, parenting skills. So the perception of parent and family engagement was very locked into a 0 to 5 conversation that happened outside of the K through 12 school environment. Because by the time they came to first grade, it's like, okay, just drop them off, stay outside on the fence, and then we'll take care of it from here. As I've evolved over the 10 years, I see that this pattern, this pipeline, we cannot ignore the family component along all the educational pipeline from 0 to 5 all the way to college and career. And that evolution has taken families and schools when I was there in being able to evolve in that conversation, because we were doing a lot of work around family literacy in the early years, to then thinking, how do we engage parents and families around EL reclassification? How do we help them around math? How do we help them around college, career, and exploration? And one of those pieces of work that we started to engage beyond early education was a work we did with Moreno Valley Unified School District, where they were looking at reclassification or long-term English language learners in middle school. And the average, I think, reclassification rate in middle school is around 15% or 17% per year. With the work in partnering with the district, the families, we were able to get to 45% reclassification rate after a year and a half and 75% reclassification rate after 2 years. The power of being able to bring the parents and the educators to be connected on one specific topic of saying what we want is to reclassify the students. We have to talk to each other. We have to understand what is it, the intervention. We have to understand the expectations, and we need to provide families with those support that they need. Most recently, or newest part of the work at families and schools was around transition into college. How do we engage parents to help their first-time college goers be able to transition into a community school? And that starts to push the envelope of what we think family engagement is, from just thinking about it from a 0 to 5 perspective to saying, what is the role of families all along the educational pipeline? And I have a 6-year-old son, and I'll tell you, I am sure that what I'm going to do to support him at 6 years old is going to be very different than what is going to be at 18 years old. But that doesn't minimize the role that I need to play in being able to support that my son's success, right? So that was one big learning that I'm recognizing, is that we have segmented family engagement to what happens in the early years, and I think that has to be expanded. The second dimension, so I see that dimension as a horizontal line for those math folks, one dimension. The second dimension that I would see more as the vertical line is the fact that we have multiple players that are working on family engagement, yet historically, the perception of family engagement was, how do I tell the parent what they should be doing better, right? So I will be having a conversation with someone at the school, and I said, well, what are your family engagement practices? And they would say, well, we wrote everything that the parents needed to do, and we gave it to them in a paper. Right? So it's very clear, family engagement is about telling the parent, please do this, read to your child, have a space in your school, in your home to be able for them to read, volunteer, be a parent leader, and that's my role as the institution, is to be able to tell them what they should be doing, right? And this, I think, correlates I don't know, many of you know about dual capacity model from Karen Mapp, where she starts taking that framing away from that and says, well, wait a minute. For this partnership to work, we have to have a dual capacity model where we have to develop the capacity of both the families, but also the capacity of the staff. We can have a conversation around family and community engagement and welcome environments without having the conversation of what is the school doing internally to make it as welcoming for families to be engaged, right? The founder of Families in Schools told a story that she would repeat all the time about working in Boyle Heights and trying to convince the principal about having a back-to-school night, and that maybe they needed to do different practices to outreach the families. And finally, the principal said, okay, try whatever you need to do. We're going to have back-to-school night. And so many parents came that night to the back-to-school night that the school had called the cops because they didn't know what to do with the parents. And they were not well prepared to receive them. That became, chaotic. It became, and then it became almost like they were afraid that there was going to be a riot at the school. But the question is, what are the things that need to change internally to be able to make sure that we're welcoming those parents effectively? And this is the work that Karen Mapp has been doing very thoroughly about competencies. What competencies do we need to have as school staff to welcome families? What mindsets do we have? The mindset of of being able to respect everybody where they are, to meet them where they are, to recognize that that people are not empty vessels, right? But that everybody brings an asset to the conversation, and we build upon that asset, right? Are we asset based? That's a mindset, right? Are we seeing our parents from that asset based approach? Are we seeing or parents from a customer service approach? That they have to feel welcome. The number one thing in my 10 years that always help parents say is that how they felt from the first day of school made it a big impression on how they were going to engage in that school. If from that first day they felt that they were being pushed out, that they're not welcome, that sets the pattern on how they're going to engage with their child's school, right? So in this conversation around dimensions, the first dimension is the educational pipeline. Family engagement happens from A through C. On the second dimension is going to be the fact that it has to be a two-prong approach, that it has to be also what competencies, what skills the staff need to engage parents, but also what are the competencies and skills that families need to be able to engage. The third piece of that dimension is what I've been wrestling with the idea of practice to policy. There's a lot of tension between this feeling that family engagement is about what happens in the classroom, in the home, to what happens in the school board or even at the state board. And there's some folks that would say, look, all that work that is happening at the state level, forget about it. It's about what happens at the classroom level. It's about volunteering. It's about reading. It's the practical things that happen on a day-to-day level. And other people would say, forget about that. We're going to be doing that forever. But unless we change policy at the state or district level, nothing is going to be changing, right? So there's this tension that is wrestling between those who feel that it has to be one or the other, but that I believe has to expand a spectrum. Because at least in the last 10 years that I've been doing that work, what most of the time happened was that family engagement was called random acts of kindness, right? It was that great principal who cared deeply about family engagement, and that person, the parents loved them. But what happened after that principal left, right? So there's this tension between feeling that by talking about policy, we're talking about compliance, right? Oh, well, if we put it into law, it's just going to become compliance. So, it goes back to the old ways. But how do we scale up the good practices? If we knew that that principal was doing the right things to engage families, the right things to connect with them, how can we have 10,000 more principals just like him or her, right? So the conversation about this dimension about practice and policy is how do we replicate the good work that is happening on a random basis because someone cares, because someone really wants to do the work, to say this is the expectation for the school. At any point, you walk into any school in California, you should expect a certain level of family engagement quality, right? Would you agree? So the conversation about these three dimensions has been very much locked, and when you talk to some people, they see it in a very narrow piece. And I think that being able to walk away from families and schools and having some time to think about this gives me some level of perspective about we are not seeing the whole picture. We're not seeing the high definition 3D perspective of family engagement. We're seeing it in one dimension, we're seeing it in a two dimension, we're seeing it in a very silo perspective. For some, family engagement is just about the parents. For others, it's about the school staff. For others, it's about policy. For others, it's about practice. For others, it's only around 0 to 5, and for others, it's around the education pipeline. But as I'm thinking more and more, we have to see, if we really want to make changes in our schools, in our districts, we have to understand that family engagement is a much more holistic approach than just one of those items. So here are some, so that I think, just to repeat again, is the family engagement is from the beginning to the end, and the role of parents matter. It's a dual capacity approach. It's what happens inside the school as much as what happens outside of the school. And the third is that there's practice as much as policy involved in making good family engagement happen. In the policy arena, I think that this is where the great work that the state has been doing around LCFF is how do we think around family engagement from an LCFF perspective? FIS and many of the other organizations like CTF were advocating to make family engagement one of the 8 key priorities of LCFF. So the conversation is a valid one. How are we going to be able to expect family engagement to be at a high level across California? And how do we tie that to funding? Because most of the time, what I've seen is that family engagement is that thing that I tell my staff or maybe a principal and say, hey, we really want to have family engagement, or strategic plan says family engagement, or work plan says family engagement, or sick plan say family engagement, but you don't have a budget, okay? There's no budget. Just do whatever you can with what you have, right? So how do we connect the dots that some of this work requires resources, and not necessarily just monetary resources, but people's time? Teachers volunteering. They should be compensated or given some kind of support to make sure that they are available at after-school programs, in the weekends programs. So there is a conversation about resources that we're not having around family engagement. We have to connect it to the budget. If you look at LAUSD's budget around family engagement, the last time I checked before I left, it was out of LCFF money, family engagement was 0.001% of their budget. Yet, the focus around family engagement is significant. So there are conversations to be had between that policy and practice conversation, that if you don't have the policy, those practices are going to continue to happen randomly, right? So I kind of leave it, I'm going to leave it at that. I think some people didn't like the way I was thinking, but no, I really offer it as a way to say, look, I'm thinking about this as much as you are, and now with having moved away from families and schools, it gives me a little time to reflect. There was a great article I read last night about saying, how do you live? It's called living in the gray, being in the gray. In a world where everything's a pressure to be right, wrong, to be black and white, how do you get comfortable with the fact that most of the things in our world are gray? It's a mixture of colors, it's uncertainty, there's no right answers. And I'm going through that process of getting some clarity and kind of coming out of that fogness by being removed a little bit from the work. And now that I'm at United Way, I'm starting to learn other concepts and other information that now is starting to also influence the way I think about family engagement. One of the first pieces of data United Way gave me about, they're working a lot on homelessness, is that there's 17,000 students in LAUSD that are homeless right now, mostly in the San Fernando Valley. They're living in their garage without water and a toilet, maybe. They're actually living out of like a van, a car. They're living out of temporary shelter. How do we think about family engagement when we're looking at a child and saying, hey, maybe your parents should be more engaged and come to after school or to volunteer, when 17% of those students are living, they don't even know where they're going to stay that night, right? Telfair, I think, was the school with the highest homeless count. 25% of their students are homeless. So that in my mind adds another dimension of the work about how do we meet families where they are. When we're talking about poverty, I mean, the last numbers I was looking about, more than 72% of all students in LAUSD are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And that's just the basic, right? How many of those are living in extreme poverty? How do we think about family engagement? How do we think about the basic needs that those families have? So as I'm now embarking in this conversation, I'm having another way of trying to think through this, where we have to continue to think about how do we meet parents where they are? Because they are living through very difficult situations, not only on homelessness, economic opportunity, but even the tensions that we've been living with the political environment where we are, where they're scared of actually going to school. We saw significant drops of parents volunteering, going to events after the current administration came into power. Obviously, there's fears of deportation. There's fears of, I don't know if one day I'm going to show up to my child's school and I won't be able to come back, right? So I leave you with that, our work continues to evolve, our thoughts continue to evolve, and I'm evolving as part of that. And and really thinking around the issues of our housing, homelessness, economic opportunity within this context of family engagement, where we have to continue to think that we need to meet parents where they are. We have to be culturally competent. We have to have the right mindsets to appreciate every parent for who they are and what they bring to the table. And, and the strong belief, and I always tell my staff this, is the strongest asset a parent has is the love for their children. That any parent can give you, and every parent will give you. Most of the parents are doing the impossible right now just to stay afloat. But if we tap into that love and we connect to individuals, as families, we can accomplish great things, just like Ms. Mora did with my mom. It was about connection. Family engagement is not an event. Family engagement is a relationship. And the more we see it from that vantage point, I think the more we're going to be able to help the families be able to help them accomplish the goals that they had, just like the dream my mom had for me to be a professional. So now now the workplace has changed, so we don't have to wear suits anymore. So when she sees me, she's like, "Where's your suit? How come you don't have your suit on?" I'm like, "Mom, I don't have to wear a suit anymore every day." But I'm very proud to be here. I'm really, excited to continue the partnership, and I know that I'll be getting more calls from Sunny now at United Way on being able to see how we partner, and I'm sure that we'll find ways to work together. So thank you so much.